I just thought, right, I'm not going to end up like that. I'm going to do whatever it takes to find opportunities for myself and to be more in control.
My guest today is the Right Hon Justine Greening, who started her career as a chartered accountant at PricewaterhouseCoopers, went on to hold finance and strategy roles at GlaxoSmithKline and Centrica, and entered the UK's Parliament in 2005.
I believe that businesses that are better at being engines of social mobility do better. You know, show me the England football manager who's going to go into this year's World Cup and say, I'd like to pick from a smaller squad, please.
Over 14 years, she served as Economic Secretary to the Treasury and later held 3 cabinet posts: Transport, International Development, where she led the UK's Ebola response and oversaw the 0.7% aid target being enshrined in law, and Education, Women and Equalities. She left Cabinet in 2018 to found the Social Mobility Pledge, now the largest business campaign of its kind with over 800 organisations covering more than 8 million people.
If you're running Costa Coffee and there's a discussion around where are the beans coming from, you wouldn't kind of sit down and say, oh, I don't know, generally some turn up, it's fine. Like, it's a supply chain that we need. Talent is a supply chain that companies need. And I personally, in this day and age, wouldn't leave that to chance.
Welcome to Enter the Boardroom, the podcast for boards and board members. I'm your host, Oliver Cummings, CEO of Neural, home to the Enter the Boardroom community, the destination for serving and aspiring board directors. Justine, welcome to Enter the Boardroom.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Before we discuss your work on social mobility, I'd love to understand better where the conviction comes from. You grew up in Rotherham in the 1980s at a moment when the town's entire economic model was collapsing. What's that taught you about the relationship between effort, reward, and the system around you?
It's a great question because when I look back now, it really did shape me as a person. I think above all, it taught me just how much opportunity matters to people and how corrosive lack of opportunity is for them, what it does to people when they just feel like they're stuck and that they can't put themselves into anything. You know, when, say for my dad, when he was unemployed for over a year, literally nobody was willing to pay him to do anything. And I think that for anyone is just a terrible sense of not being worth anything when actually people are. And I also felt it was a complete waste of talent. I just saw all this talent not being used, and it just felt, I suppose my earliest memory was I thought, I'm never going to let that happen to me. So the first thing that maybe that experience did to me was make me see this decouple of effort and reward, you know, people willing to work really hard, but no ability to get a reward. And just thinking I was never going to be in that position if I could help it. I knew that education was my route to being more in control of my life in a way that maybe my dad and our family hadn't been. And so I just thought, right, I'm not going to end up like that. I'm going to do whatever it takes to find opportunities for myself and to be more in control. So yeah, I think when I look back on it, certainly my childhood was really happy. You know, I was in a really fantastic, supportive family, brilliant parents. But actually around me, I think if you are growing up in a town where most children's dads are unemployed, I think it's probably only now, you know, as I got older, when I look back on it, that's really, really tough, actually. But I think it did spur me on to think I'm going to make something of myself. I'm not going to waste my talent.
Sounds like a really formative and influential moment in the way that you think. Have there been other moments in your life that you look back on now that have really shaped how you operate today in the boardroom?
Definitely. I would say, and it's probably from a similar time. So I remember that my dad worked in the steel industry and people were on strike. He wasn't really involved with the union, but like, everybody was out, you know, if no one could get into work. And I remember asking him, I was probably about 10, and I asked him, why are people on strike? And it was my first economics lesson, really, because he said to me, people are on strike because they think they're going to lose their jobs. And I said, why are they going to lose their jobs? And he said, because we're not making any money. And I said, why aren't you making any money? And he said, because nobody really wants to buy what we make now. And this was steel being uncompetitive. So the other thing it absolutely taught me was that people lose their jobs when businesses aren't making a profit, not when they are. And it taught me that business is at the heart of how we create opportunities, and that better, stronger businesses mean more opportunities. And they're at the core of how we make sure people get to use their potential. So ironically, I was growing up in a part of the country that was maybe very Labour and actually maybe had more of a mentality in terms of its politics about a state solution. Whereas the lesson I took from growing up was much more, we need businesses to do better if people are going to do better. And I think that's why I was so interested in economics. Maybe that's why I ended up becoming an accountant, because I think I literally saw that the numbers have got to add up. And certainly that's what we had to make sure happened at home. You know, my mum and dad used to be adding up the supermarket bill before they left to go to the supermarket to make sure we had enough cash to buy what we needed. So stuff would come off the list if we couldn't afford it. And obviously this is well before the internet. So, you know, looking back on it, my mum and dad must have had to somehow keep a running tally of how much everything cost when they wandered around. So it was an up-to-date list. I don't know. But yeah, I think all of that made me want to understand what was happening, understand the economics, understand around how to make numbers add up. And maybe I think one of my earliest ambitions is actually I wanted to do my own company, because I remember thinking, well, if I could do a company that was successful, it would create some jobs. And then we'd have more people in work. So I suppose I always saw business as part of the solution, and I still do today.
So you've gone on to found the Social Mobility Pledge. For board members listening now, why should they be concerned about social mobility, and what do they need to know?
If you think about social mobility in terms of people being able to achieve their potential, and that involves probably two things. One is developing that talent and potential. The other is then making sure it can connect up with opportunities. I believe that businesses that are better at being part of that and themselves being engines of social mobility do better. You know, show me the England football manager who's going to go into this year's World Cup and say, I'd like to pick from a smaller squad, please. That's not going to be a recipe for success. You want to reach into that wider talent pool, find that diverse talent, not just, if you like, the visually diverse talent, whether it's gender or an ethnicity, but you want people who think differently. But more than that, you want to get the most out of them. And you want them to feel that your business is a place where they can really progress, make the most of their talents. And I think all the work that we're doing with employers and social mobility, employees love it, because actually in helping the businesses do better in communities driving social mobility, actually it also helps them do better themselves on finding that wider talent pool, retaining it. I think giving their own employees a real sense of purpose around the values of company, what it stands for. So it just ends up being a virtuous circle. And I passionately believe that we're in a version of the world where it is all about talent. It's all about the knowledge economy. It's increasingly about creativity and people's ability to think creatively in any role that they've got. And that requires companies that are smart at developing people and almost create a framework for them to be able to feel like they can innovate and that those ideas can bubble up wherever they're from in the business, that it's not just top down. So yeah, and it requires a different kind of leadership as well, probably, that maybe is different from the era, that I grew up in going into business, where it was very much Jack Welch spreadsheets. I think there's much more around what good leadership constitutes now.
So the Social Mobility Pledge asks organizations to do 3 things. For those not familiar with it, can you briefly explain what the asks are?
So we want companies to get into schools and colleges and universities talking about what their opportunities actually look like. Many young people are just as I was, if they see a sector that doesn't immediately grab them, they think, oh, I don't want to work there. What they probably don't realize is there are tech jobs in every sector now. There are marketing jobs in every sector, finance jobs. Each sector actually in itself has got some brilliant opportunities. So it's about bringing those alive for young people and helping them have a sense of destination. Where might they be able to get to? The second commitment really is around opening up for work experience. And this is really important today. We've got 1 million NEETs pretty much. This issue of helping to develop people is crucial. And I think sometimes employers may feel, well, this person's just going to be shadowing for a day. What are they going to learn? The answer is they'll learn a huge amount. A lot of young people haven't even been into an office. Maybe they haven't been into a workplace. So they're like sponges. They'll soak in a huge amount more than probably employers realize. I also think it's sometimes hard to forget just how little you knew as a person when you first stepped into the workplace. And, I think I had one suit when I turned up at PricewaterhouseCoopers all those years ago. And so you go on a massive, almost vertical learning curve. So it's the more that people can help develop their employability skills, get a bit job ready, all of that works. So second is work experience. And then the third is just fair recruitment. It's around hopefully inspiring young people around where they can get to, giving them a taste of what your opportunities might actually be like in practice, and then making sure that if they really do want to make that jump into your business, that you've removed the barriers, whether it's around education, whether it's around how they apply for those roles, all those things that we know about that, make it easier for people to basically have a shot at getting into roles that they might really enjoy. I think since then, we've developed our thinking around the pledge, and that's where these 15 purpose goals came from, because we realized actually there's probably more around it that we need to take action on. But certainly those 3 things for business can make a real difference.
It's interesting. I've been thinking actually over the last sort of 12, 18 months that we should be creating sort of opportunities for kids from local schools to come in and just, experience life in an office. I mean, interesting. We used to have a graduate program. We no longer have it. And with the way AI has gone, I see that ever less likely. One of the things I've been wrestling with, though, when thinking about creating that opportunity for kids is, how do you make it fair? Because there's a whole load of noise around, if you don't pay for kids for doing internships, you're creating a sort of an unfair playing field. At the same time, when budgets are stretched, it's hard to justify spending on something that perhaps you don't need versus something that you do need, at least in the short term horizon. So how would you sort of counsel board members to think about that balance, striking that balance, and how they sort of engage with their executive team on that?
I would say the key to this is making it fit with the business strategy. So where we've positioned all of our work is not that this is just a good thing to do for society. It absolutely is. More people with more opportunities will create more opportunities for all of us. But actually the best pieces of work I think we've done and the best strategies are the ones that absolutely help drive the business forward. So rather than doing, say, more piecemeal bits of activity, actually, what the best companies are doing is literally creating a talent pipeline. and they're getting into schools or colleges, they're going through that process of thinking, right, we can explain what we do. We can start to put in place some work experience. The next thing is they're then creating a cohort of young people that maybe from which they can offer some apprenticeships, then they lead on to roles within the business. So I think, you're absolutely right, Oliver. It is about making it actually work for the company. And the reason that matters is because unless that happens, it's not going to be sustainable. And so what you'll end up with are really good, well-intentioned pieces of effort in the good times. But actually when it's tougher, in other words, exactly when this can have the biggest impact, it kind of declines. And so I can think, for example, you can think about a long-term effort on this, like, for example, Leonardo making helicopters in Yeovil, working strategically now with Yeovil College, for the long term. And the way you make a helicopter now is different from even 10 years ago. It's definitely different from 20 years ago. So actually, for them to be able to continue to keep the business there, they literally have to work upstream to transition skills, so that those skills from that entire region are going to continue to be future-proof for what they will need coming up and in this world of AI. Now, on the back of their ability to do that, they can either keep going as a business or not. And so for them, you can see that is mission critical. But, you can think of other completely different examples like Aldermore Bank. A lot of their client base are maybe non-standard businesses. There may be a dentist who's an entrepreneur. That person also needs a mortgage. So they're not quite the usual credit rating assessment. But actually, if they can be more front-footed on driving social mobility, progression, supporting people, actually what it also does ultimately is reduce their bad debt risk. So if they can be better at helping these people develop, then actually that's better for the business. There's lower bad debt risk. It means the debt book itself then can be refinanced at better rates. That's a business strategy that is a win-win for everyone. Ditto if you look at, for example, E.ON, actually not a different sort of segment of people, but some of the work that they're doing, for example, in Coventry around energy vulnerability, really important now with all of the situation happening in the Middle East. Actually, again, the more they can help people shift on to potentially renewables, the better affordability of energy they're able to provide. And actually the better affordability, again, that means they're less likely to end up not being able to pay their bill. And again, it's created a much more virtuous circle. So I think we've got a lot of businesses starting to think strategically around how do we actually make this work for us? And of course, E.ON's a great example also because it's just doing brilliant work on apprenticeships and, its ability to then retain, for example, I think it's got one of the best ratings between 16 and 24-year-olds as a place to work. It's then going to be much more likely to get great talent who look at which are good companies to work for. So yeah, it's working out how this fits with your business strategy is absolutely imperative. And almost when you've got that win-win, then you're really going to make a difference, but both internally and externally.
So the examples you gave there were all big multinationals. I suppose, if you take us as an example, we're a team of 65, 70 people. So much more sort of SME. Like what does the picture look like for those smaller organizations who actually make up probably the majority of sort of employment opportunities by volume, at least, where they perhaps don't have the resource or time or in-house team who can be sort of going out to do some of the things that you talked about?
Yeah, and so sometimes companies are doing things just at a smaller scale. So On the Beach, has around 400 employees, for example. We're a huge company in terms of revenue and the bottom line, but actually people-wise, not as big as some of the other businesses I've talked about. Aldermore Bank probably isn't huge in terms of employee. So I think there's a question of scale. No doubt about that. And I'd also say for some companies, particularly, if they're smaller, they're almost picking their partners about where they want to work. So there's a whole ecosystem of support out there around, for example, 10,000 Black interns, where actually some of that group of people you might want to think, right, we're going to have a go at this piece of the challenge. Actually, you can work with them. I'm on the education advisory panel of the Sutton Trust. And, so for example, if you're in law or accounting, that's particularly a charity that does brilliant work doing that pre-pipeline employability work for young people and finding great talent. So there's different ways to do it. There's the King's Trust, another amazing organization that helps, again, a different group. So I think I would say if you're small, then, look at finding some of those partners that have a really great understanding of their area that they're working in and then work with them. And I think part of what we're doing with all of our work on the Purpose Coalition is, like you say, for some of those bigger companies where, there's the more moving parts, actually they want a more sophisticated strategic approach that joins up as a whole, because actually that makes sense for them and it's how they can have the biggest impact, within the business, but within community. So it's horses for courses. And, you sort of asked, why is this so hard earlier? And it's hard because we've never really answered these questions at scale before, and we need to. So I think certainly the work I'm doing, and we're a small team as well, I think we've gone further than anyone else on teasing out the answers to these questions, but we're on a journey to work out how you do this reliably everywhere for everyone. And the SME piece is always for us, I think, the toughest nut to crack, because even within the SME community, you're probably, for some SMEs, a big SME because you're 70, 80 people. My team's probably about 20 maybe. So yeah, we're all in different sectors. So even that part of the economy probably needs some slightly different solutions. The other thing I would also say for SMEs is, if you're part of a supply chain, actually what we're asking our larger businesses to do is look at how they open up some of their social mobility work to some of those parts of the supply chain that could just bolt on, become part of it. So I think there's efficient ways of doing this, but we've probably got some way to go in terms of saying exactly what best practice looks like.
The boardroom is moving fast. AI, cyber, geopolitics, ESG. These aren't peripheral topics anymore. They're central to every board agenda. If you're not confident engaging with them, it shows, and it limits what roles you can credibly go for. The Enter the Boardroom community keeps your knowledge sharp with expert events, curated content, and peer debate that keeps you current and confident across the issues that matter. Visit etb.neural.com to find out more. From where you sit running the pledge and chairing the education advisory group of the Sutton Trust, do you see corporate Britain actually changing on social mobility, or is most of it still performative?
I think there is a lot of change happening, actually. I think it's easy to almost look how far we've got to get, but I think business is changing, and I think leadership's changing, and I think it's changing for the right reason, which is because actually people who work in companies want to work in places that they feel stand for something, have a sense of purpose, and broadly have a positive footprint in the wider world. They'd rather work there than somewhere that doesn't. And I think almost the kind of classic market is driving businesses to think, well, if we want, dare I say, an employee value proposition that's going to be compelling, well, we need to have a genuine offer on this. And actually all the evidence is, if it's not authentic, then actually people see through that pretty quickly as well. So I think it's a journey as well, though, because, it's easy for me to say, oh, it should be authentic. You've got to do this. I think that's better. I genuinely think there are a lot of businesses thinking, right, well, we'd like to do this, but where do we make a start? And my advice would be, well, just kind of do something. That's what we're doing on the beach. We've made a start. We're learning what works. We're iterating. But actually in doing that, it's probably bouncing back in the company to make us feel differently as well. So I don't think there's any hard and fast rules on this, but I do think business is changing. But I also think there's a long way to go. And I think there's a long way to go on policy. You know, I think government policy should be enabling businesses to do more, if you like, and a bit like the climate change. If you want companies to be part of the solution, you have to create this enabling environment for them to have a race to the top. I don't think we've quite got, I absolutely don't think we've had that, you know, in any way, either what I might say tactically or strategically from policymakers up until now. You know, arguably, you know, on opportunity, we'd be going backwards because of the NI rise. So even harder for companies, you know, to create those opportunities, particularly for young people now.
You've touched already on some of the things you've been doing at On the Beach, but curious to hear how you've brought social mobility issues into the boardroom in your board roles.
Well, I think it probably comes down to the fact that, you know, I'm almost hardwired to talk about this, and I'm an accountant by training, and, you know, I'm absolutely convinced that the companies who do this win. And obviously I want On the Beach to win. So I think it's always going to be something that's top of my mind. Having said that, of course, overwhelmingly our discussions found our performers, what we need to do. And so probably if you ask most of my fellow board members, they'll say that a lot of the time it's Justine Greening, accountant, who's sat there pouring through the fine detail of the board pack and asking questions. So yeah, but I do think as a group, we do really think about this. You know, we have genuinely thought, what do we want to do with local schools? Which local schools where, you know, we can maybe talk about the opportunities, what we're doing on tech. You know, what do we do on gender pay gap, in the sense that actually tech, you know, often is very male dominated. So I think we have been able to bring a genuine lens to say, actually, we kind of want to make sure our opportunities are wide open to everyone. So let's not just assume that's going to happen. What are the steps that we need to? So I think maybe the one area where we need to, I'm partially joking here, but we've got a lot of accountants on the board. So there's myself, Richard Pennycook, Elaine O'Donnell, you know, maybe Sean Morton is the CEO, who was the CFO. I mean, is that too many? Can he have too many accountants? I don't know. But yeah, I mean, genuinely, to be serious, we do keep an eye on all those different layers of making sure we've got a balanced team, not just on the board, then if you like, further down the business.
But so for a board member listening to this who's thinking to themselves, Justine, you know, you sparked something in me. There's more I think our organisation could be doing, and I feel that sense of obligation and duty as a board member to catalyse that. How would you counsel them to go about it? Are there things that you would advise them not to do, as well as things to do?
That's a great question. I think, first of all, you have to start with your business model. So where do you really feel you can make a difference? So let's say you're Barclays Bank, doing all their work on financial literacy and resilience. It's clear that they touch millions of lives of their customers, and actually they've taken a lot of that and put it into schools. Over the years, they're in thousands of schools around the country. If you're UK Power Networks, then it's much more about your supply chain, arguably, and your opportunities. And they have looked at their apprenticeships and thought, right, let's absolutely make sure we're out there in some of our social mobility cold spots. So I think the first thing to do is to say, who are we? I mean, are we more like, if we're Leonardo, we're slap bang in Yeovil. We've always been in Yeovil. We've got a real sense of place here. So sometimes it's around, what can you do with your opportunities based on where you are? Sometimes it's around, well, actually, we work through our supply chain. So if we're really going to have an impact, we need to look at how we make that partnership work. Or again, it's if you're in retail, it may need a more customer facing question around how can we help our customers be socially mobile. So I think it's working back from, well, why do you think you can make a difference? You know, just because everyone else is doing something, for example, in schools, it doesn't mean you have to. You may think, well, I've got a different idea in my head around the impact that we can make. You know, it may be that you're I don't know, in early years. And so, there's some brilliant careers in early years. Clearly we know it makes a massive difference for children getting the best start. So I think it's just starting to say what's our bit of the jigsaw puzzle that we have to solve. And maybe, dare I say, Oliver, if you look across those different purpose goals, I'd be saying to companies, where do you think you kind of naturally fit? Which of these, 2 or 3, would you say are really the ones that matter to you? If you are, I don't know, Cisco, it's probably digital device, dare I say. So, there'll be some natural homes where you kind of think, actually, that's probably our area that we'll focus on.
So if I play that back, it sounds like actually being targeted is key, not necessarily just thinking about your own employee base, but about your stakeholders more broadly, your customers, your suppliers, and other stakeholders, and then not trying to boil the ocean, but picking off a few very targeted areas, which interestingly echoes the discussion I had with Professor Alison Taylor in episode 144, where she was talking about organizations who sort of greenwash and have sort of made the mistakes of trying to be all things to all people, and that is a road to certain disaster. And it sounds like actually, what you're advocating is very much the same, which is actually be really specific about what you can do well and then focus on a few areas and do a few areas well rather than trying to do everything.
Work with the grain of your business. And the key to real success is when it's almost like a Venn diagram where there's what your business can particularly do well and offer and works with what you need. And then there's what do communities need. Where you've got the overlap, that's where you really want to focus, because then not only are you doing something that works for you and is relevant to you as a business and what you need, you're doing something that's relevant to the community. And it's finding those sweet spots where you really start to have impact. And in a sense, it's not rocket science. And, it's a bit like, you think of a community as a group of customers, you're like, what do the customers need? What can we really offer, that we're particularly good at doing? Then, that's where you should start to think about focusing.
And in practical terms, for that board member who's sort of listening, going, okay, Justine, I get it. I'm clear on where I'm focusing and I'm clear on which stakeholders we should be targeting. How do you start that conversation? Is it a discussion you go have with the CEO? Is it a discussion you go have with one of the other executives? Is it one you have at the board level first? Do you need a committee to do it? Like, practically making this happen, what's been your experience of what works?
So generally, I think the discussion starts with the CEO, but often it can be the CPO that's particularly engaged with it, particularly if it's around their internal opportunities and progression and have they really created pathways through. Other times, there are some businesses that are big enough that they might have a team of people working on this. So I think this is one of, when I say there's a long way to go, actually there was a time when no one would have had anyone working on sustainability. But governance-wise, companies have worked out where that fits. And I think a lot are going through a similar approach on social mobility and, if you like, the people side of it that sits alongside the planet challenge in a way. So a different business, we'll take a different view on it, but it has to be led from the top. Otherwise it feels like it doesn't have real teeth, but it's also got to be authentic. So you do need those people that absolutely push it through the business and knit it all together, so that it's real for everybody around the organization. So, a great example of this would be, Sodexo, who do facilities management, they also run several prisons around the country. They have a person who does a brilliant job of challenging the whole business on the so what, to make sure it's never just like a performative going through the motions, and she really, if you like, lives that strategy to help make sure it comes alive for everyone across the wider business. And, and that's the business is really looking at how it can be literally an engine of social mobility. It takes people from all walks of life, all sorts of communities. So if it can really help pull through that talent, then it's an engine of social mobility, and we want more companies to do that kind of stuff.
I can imagine one of the big challenges people will face is that, if you think about this on an Eisenhower matrix, this probably fits into the important but not urgent box. And so CEOs everywhere will be saying, Justine, I totally buy into this. I get it. Absolutely, we should be doing it. But right now in my important and urgent box, I've got navigating AI, I've got navigating the disruption from the sort of the energy crisis and the sort of macroeconomic situation, plus, another 5 things on my list. Those are where I've got to dedicate my attention. I'll get onto this at some point, and that point is never. What's your experience been of that, and how do you overcome that?
I think it's interesting because, as a government minister, the question I'd always ask myself is, why is this the steady state? If you've got an equilibrium that's not where you want it to be, whether it's the school system or anywhere else, you've sort of got to say, well, why would you settle here? Isn't there a force for changing it? And I think with social mobility, to some extent, it's what you said, where people are in work and there's growth in the economy, everyone says, well, it's fine. There's lots of opportunities for people. What's the problem? And then you suddenly get to an issue where we've got NEETs happening and there's 1 million young people. And that's a really scarring impact on their future prospects. And then everyone's attitude is, oh God, we've just got to get them a job. Doesn't matter what. And so in a sense, we're not working upstream to fix these problems. And so the practical issue you then end up with is a skills crisis. Literally, it's going to be hard to build 1.5 million homes because we probably don't have enough people to do that with the right skills. You end up with amazing careers that companies can't find people to go into. And so you do need to work upstream. And I don't think businesses can do it all on their own, and they shouldn't. But I would argue that if you're running Costa Coffee and there's a discussion around where are the beans coming from, you wouldn't kind of sit down and say, oh, I don't know, generally some turn up, it's fine. You're like, it's a supply chain that we need. Talent is a supply chain that companies need. And I personally, in this day and age, wouldn't leave that to chance. And I also, in this age of AI, where actually the talent you need is different, the skills are different, it's changing month by month, I think businesses need to be absolutely making sure they know where they're getting their talent from. Because I think assuming the education system can continue to just catch up with this rapid pace of change, it's probably not going to happen. So businesses will need to make sure that they can get the talent that they want. And I think they will need to be more activist in thinking this is a competitive advantage for us to have more assurance around that.
We started talking about the disconnect between effort and results. Curious to hear what you see as the biggest single structural barrier that prevents effort from leading to a board career.
I think a lot of it is around, maybe it's around connections and the fact that getting that first NED role can feel hard for people. So you sort of don't know what you don't know. I do think the NED community is very well networked. So people are talking to one another. And I think maybe that might mean that sometimes if boards are recruiting a new NED, maybe it's easier just to say, actually, you need these skills. There's a person over there that I know who'd be brilliant. Why don't you chat with them? So I think maybe it's that first barrier of getting that first NED role. I also think, and this is why, what a new role does is great, because you're creating much more of a level playing field to sort of see what's out there, which roles are out there. For too long, maybe the whole industry, the NED recruitment industry, being you've got to wait for someone to come to you with an opportunity rather than throw your hat in the ring. And in practice, maybe you can go on some of those websites and see what NED roles are there, but they're kind of tucked away at the bottom, and it's a world away from Rightmove, isn't it? Trying to find a new home, putting in your filters, and then getting multiple emails every day when a new house comes on the market. So yeah, I think it's removing some of those barriers of what's out there, and maybe the experience of, you know, people being able to get some of that pre-NED development so they know what world they're going into, and maybe they can perform better in some of those interviews.
The chair is listening to this episode and is thinking, okay, Justine, you've inspired me. I want to make sure that my next board appointment brings more socioeconomic diversity, social diversity. What's one concrete thing they should do differently? And in your experience, what's the excuse they're most likely to make for not doing it?
Well, actually, I think it's quite hard because we don't track socioeconomic background. So I think it's very difficult to find that kind of diversity overtly. And one of the reasons Britain doesn't drive as much social mobility as it could do is because it's something we're not tracking at all. And this is what I've slightly obsessed over as a finance person who likes numbers in my social mobility work. I think the most important thing actually probably is just to recognize you've got a gap. And maybe it's around recognizing, you know, not just what that skills shortage is, maybe that you're looking for that NED role to particularly point towards, but also understanding that, you know, you've got to have that balanced set of personalities around the table and maybe that balanced set of insights. So I wouldn't say I'd overtly measure and look for it, but I do think you need to keep an eye broadly on whether you've got that mix. That's probably what I would say. So for example, so I think it's about understanding where you feel you've got that lack of insight maybe, or perspective, and there will always be a fantastic NED that can step into that role. But it's understanding where the gaps are, I think. I think it's really hard on socioeconomic, like I said, because we're not measuring it. So who knows, you know, what most people's backgrounds are.
Justine, time has flown, which means it's time for the lightning round, where I'm going to ask you a short question and ask you for a quick response if you're ready.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Best book every board member should read, and why?
The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday, because it's just great. And actually it's about the fact that when things are tough, they're telling you something about your direction that you should listen to.
Boardroom behaviour that irritates you most?
People dancing around the topic when we just need to say, is this, isn't it? What are we going to do? I hate faffing. I don't think we faff on my board, by the way, just in case any of them are watching this.
A question every board should ask at least once a year.
Do we really feel our employees buy into what we're trying to achieve? You should probably be asking that every day, but I mean, I think genuinely saying, do they really feel it in their bones?
What's a boardroom myth you think needs busting?
Maybe that it's kind of just the numbers, you know. And I don't know. Maybe there's a bit of a myth that the bigger the pack, the better. And actually, I think sometimes shorter but clearer is better.
Less is more.
Mm-hmm.
Favorite quote?
Well, it's got to be talent spread evenly, opportunity is not.
A piece of board advice that sounds right but is wrong.
Go with your gut. Never that simple.
What have you changed your mind on about boards over time, and how has that changed how you behave?
I think maybe boards are better functioning, certainly, you know, than I love the board that I'm on. I think I was going to say fluid, but what I mean is I think it's quite entrepreneurial. It's less stuffy. So I think maybe I've kind of realized that boards are less stuffy, maybe less formalistic than maybe I'd thought. I think we have a very open board and open discussions, and I think that's crucial. And I think it's made me feel maybe more confident about putting but what about this 10 percentile chance that maybe we should just kick the tires off issues on the table? I think that's really healthy.
When was the last time you got a significant judgment call wrong in the boardroom, and what did you learn?
I can think of a time when I was concerned about maybe one bit of a new product, and maybe my inner cautious accountant was like, well, you know, but will we get a bit stretched? And actually it was crucial for us to step into that space, as it turned out. What did I learn from that? Well, maybe it goes back to, you tend to regret what you don't do more than what you do. And that actually a bit of R&D is crucial. And although I cut my teeth at SmithKline and GSK and, they've got entire departments for R&D, actually R&D in every company matters, and a bit of a ballsy decisions around marketing and testing products is absolutely essential if you're really going to, move forward strategically.
Best interview question to ask a prospective non-executive?
Probably, why do you care about this company? Why do you think it matters?
And finally, one thing our listeners should take away from this episode, if they take nothing else.
That if we don't fix social mobility, we're in real trouble. But the good news is we can. So why don't we do it? And we've all got part of the solution.
Justine, thank you so much for taking the time to share your experience and wisdom.
Thanks very much, Oliver. I love coming on.
If you want to walk into any board conversation with confidence on the issues that are reshaping governance right now, the Enter the Boardroom community keeps you sharp. Listeners get 10% off. Visit etb.neural.com and use the code ENTER at checkout.